Okay, why don't we open it up for any questions or comments? We do have a microphone. And please introduce yourselves and let us know what organization or business you're with.
Matt Hinch with the Greater Des Moines Partnership. I lead our government affairs division here. And I guess maybe Tamara's question for you. You talked about the public policy and the one-stop approach that encompasses everything that failed the McCain-Kennedy bill most recently. Is there an approach amongst think tanks in D.C. and across the country to do what you have suggested and take a more incremental approach, such as attaching riders to Homeland Security appropriations bills and other bills that, while they're supposed to be enacted every year, haven't over the past several, but maybe tying some of those things to the funding, because one of the arguments you always hear is, well, we can't do any of this stuff until we get our border secure. Right. So would you expound a little bit on that and some of the approaches that you're thinking about using in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Into the Washington, the morass of Washington. So what happened this year was there isn't too much thought about attaching it to stuff like appropriations, because it's so emotional that, you know, even the people who really want to get it done sort of hesitate to do that. Everybody sort of knows it needs a little more debate than just like attaching to appropriations. But there have been, so like, I worked really closely on McCain-Kennedy bill, which was the 06-07 bill that we all followed on the front pages, which failed miserably. And then for 5 years, basically, Congress has not been willing to even talk about immigration. You know, my metaphor is like frozen tundra. I mean, even staffers who I worked with, you know, they would see me coming in the hall, they would go the other way. You know, people that I was like up late at night with working on the bill, you know, suddenly aren't answering my phone calls, you know, stay away, immigration. But what's happened in the last 6 to 9 months is we're starting to see that change. And it started when very tough, hawkish, immigration hawk Republicans in the House wanted to pass E-Verify for all employers. I don't know how many of you know E-Verify is the bill that is the program that you can check whether your workers are legal or not. And the Republicans in the House want to make that mandatory for all employers. And what they realized is they couldn't do that. They couldn't get the support even for that unless they came up with some answer for the agriculture who needed the workers. Because if they passed mandatory E-Verify, it would put like basically labor-intensive agriculture out of business. So suddenly they realized that to do even this kind of like, you know, it's hard for Congress people to vote against enforcement, right? Even to do this sort of obvious no-brainer thing, they also had to do a fix. So suddenly you had like Republicans thinking about fixes for the first time in 5 years. And they were small fixes. Again, it was, can we fix the temporary worker program for agriculture? There's a lot of talk in Washington about can we come up with some more visas for entrepreneurs? There's a lot of talk in Washington about one bill that actually passed in the House was a bill that, with the system now, you have the same number of visas from every country. So you have the same number of visas for India as you have for like Monaco, right? Doesn't make much sense. Not too many people want to come from Monaco. A lot of people want to come from India. So there was a bill to lift the country caps. So they're very little fixes, right? They're all very little fixes. They're like rifle shots when, you know, what we need is like a whole cure for cancer. They're little tiny Band-Aids. But people are starting to talk about those fixes. None of them have passed yet. The one that would lift the country caps was actually amazing. It passed in the House by 389 votes. I mean, that's incredible. Like, you couldn't pass motherhood in the House by 389 votes. You know, that you got so many people like supporting it, Democrats and Republicans, because they understood those country caps didn't make any sense. But then it got held up in the Senate by guess who? Senator Grassley. But the point is that there's starting to be, so Senator Grassley's like a whole story in his own right. Maybe we should have like a separate meeting about Senator Grassley and what to do about him on immigration. But the point is that there's a lot of talk about these little fixes, and they're tending to be, the Republicans are on board for a lot of them. They tend to be, it's all about fixes to the legal system. Nobody's talking much about how to help unauthorized Mexicans, but we're starting to see ferment. And so I'm, you know, quite hopeful that in the kind of new after the election, we're going to start to move on some of these fixes. And, exactly what they'll be and what sequence they'll go, sort of hard to say. But I'm kind of guessing STEM students comes early, country caps comes early, agriculture temporary worker program comes early. H-1Bs, might take them a while to fix. And the problem that H-1Bs waiting for green cards, which is really the biggest problem in the whole system, that's probably going to take a long time to fix. But, at least the argument is at least let's get started.
And Matt, to add on to the HR 3012, the bill that would change the caps, when we first addressed that issue, so we've addressed that issue twice from the Des Moines community in with the Iowa delegation, twice this year. The first time, the immune response that kicked in was, no, it has to be a part of the comprehensive immigration reform. Well, nothing comprehensive can happen in Congress at this point in time, or for the foreseeable future. But by the second time when we went back there, we knew that 4 out of the 5 from the House had supported it from within Iowa. But we had to go back through the education process on why changing the caps was important to the medical community, to the tech community, to the engineering community. And it was affecting people here because existing doctors and engineers and researchers were doing reverse immigration. They were picking up their families and leaving. It is more advantageous for them to go back to the home country than wait here for 5, 10, 20 years for an EAD or a green card. So,
Grassley, we got to work on Grassley.
well, we've had lots of conversations in person. and with the staff,
We'll
yes.
talk later.
Other questions or comments?
I have to use the microphone. I hate the microphone. Can you hear me without the microphone? Oh, okay, sorry. Heidi Wessels. I'm actually the executive director with Neighborhood Development Corporation. We are a very small, very unique nonprofit developer, commercial developer, mixed-use developer within the city of Des Moines urban core areas. And so definitely on a very, very small scale, but equally as important. I probably lease in the number of small startup businesses that I see. 75% of my tenants are startup immigrant businesses from all over the place. And what I really do see is the importance of the immigrant population to come into some of the decaying urban core areas and really redevelop those areas. I just see it as such, and I work with people that have fled their countries, that were school administrators or engineers that, mop the floors at Mercy Hospital at night and come and open up their businesses all day long. So I struggle with traditional business resources, but it's really interesting to see, and also just the research on the number of small startup immigrant businesses as opposed to people living within the United States and just different banking opportunities, how they do business. So it's a critical part of what I see, and it's always surprising to people when they find out the number of small entrepreneurial, and when I say small, because people say small business 100 to 200, I'm saying like 3 to 5. So it is a critical part of the community that I see is the transformation of the urban areas where, quite frankly, a lot of people just don't want to live anymore. So,
And if I could, if there's one thing that you could change in terms of helping those entrepreneurs, what would it be in terms of at the state or federal level?
I think that the one thing that I struggle with is access when I work with organizations like the Small Business Development Corporations or the SBA. They're so, well, they're very bureaucratic, but they're also very straight line in one direction. The immigrants that I have, they'll go back to school for university for additional education. They speak the language, but they don't write the language. So when and I'm not, I understand the limitations where you can't print off everything in every single language. So I work with them and emphasize, for me, is trying to find resources to assist the immigrants. So programs maybe, or just a resource of people to come together. Mm-hmm. And what would I say to take back to you? Just the vital I think just seeing a lot of, what I see is a lot of people wanting to come back to the Central Core and invest larger businesses just simply for the diversity that's there. We see a lot of tendency to come back to the downtown core and invest business there because, quite frankly, people find it a little bit more stimulating to see that. So it's exciting for me. It's always a challenge. I work with what you have here, but really in Iowa, I think it's really limited for the clients that I work with. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Any reaction or?
Yeah, well, I mean, it just shows you like how broadly in the community immigration affects. I mean, I would never have thought, if I met you on an airplane, I would have thought if she isn't going to have anything to say about immigration, because just hearing what you do. But it's that important in our communities, in all of our communities. I mean,
It is amazing to see people go through the process. A friend of mine just got his green card, and he's been working on that. He's a professor for 15 years in the country.
Owning businesses or being in control of your own, not even destiny, but your own paycheck or what you earn is so in our DNA, the human DNA. You walk along the Skywalk, and what I lovingly call Sky Mall, it's Hawkeye Pantry. It's run by a husband and wife team who moved here from Southern California to do what? To open a convenience store on the Skywalk in downtown. They're making a good living, I'm sure, but are happy doing it. And if we could help individuals like that come out of the shadows, they don't need to invest $500,000. They don't need to invest $100,000. They have the need for 10 grand, maybe less, to get that initial inventory going, right? And the SBA process that requires a collateral, it would not only kill their ability to have the business, but kill the mojo that drives them to have the business. They'd much rather be an employee somewhere at that point. So it's those hurdles that hurt people in launching their businesses. That's where the regulation is. Regulation isn't on tech businesses like us. We know how to buy services, how to get around those regulations. We know how. It's the person in the shadows who can't figure it out. So.
Yeah, that's great.
Hi, Lori Chesser from Davis Brown Law Firm, and obviously I do this all day, so I have a lot of thoughts about this, but one thing I think we don't want to overlook in the discussion is that a lot of the immigration law really isn't, it's really bad in many, many ways, but in some ways it's not so bad, it's just that it's deficient. For instance, we're not really representing the ag sector here in the middle of Des Moines, so that's a huge story from Iowa, is the ag sector. Well, most of the agriculture jobs in Iowa are not seasonal. So you've got your seasonal H-2As that helps a little but doesn't really help. You've got a program called H-2B that's for seasonal workers. The system of H-2B isn't great. You could fix it a little bit, but it's basically throw some ads out there and show that you can't get a U.S. worker and then hire someone to do the work, which would be fine, except it's seasonal and we can't use it. So if those people that were doing the hogs, the eggs, the meat, all those things, could access a system like that, they would access it. They call me all the time and want to hire people legally, and I have nothing to offer them. So that's one huge hole that we see in Iowa that you really have to make sure that message is brought back. Secondly, on the H-1Bs, which is the professional side, a number of people have talked about the limitation on the number of H-1Bs, and it is just a ridiculous arbitrary limit, and you all know that, but you think about, say, the spouses not being able to work. Well, if they're educated, if they have a degree and they could work if there were enough H-1Bs and employers weren't afraid of hiring them. Now, granted, H-1B is highly regulated, it's expensive, but most of the employers I talk to, they're willing to make that trade-off to make sure that the U.S. Worker is protected. They're willing to spend the money, they're willing to do these things because they want that worker, but then the government turn around saying to them, no, even if you're willing to do all these various things, you still can't have that worker because we just don't feel like it. It does no economic sense. There's no economic sense to the whole thing. The last thing I just wanted to point out, because it reminded me of your comment about the urban development, I just see more and more that Social Security number is our national ID, and it's causing a lot of problems, like with spouses, with people just wanting to open up a bank account before they get their work permit, or anything like that. Life is miserable for people that don't have a Social Security number in this country now, and it wasn't meant to be that way, but banking's a great example. We are, I'll often have to make a call to a banker for one of my clients who's here legally but doesn't have a Social Security number, and say to them, now, why is it you're not opening a bank account for this person? It's just something that is becoming pervasive. Health insurance, all these things. Why do you need one? So, that's something outside of the direct immigration regulation, but I think this whole mindset of people are here taking something away from us if they don't have a Social Security number, and it just keeps getting worse. So those are three big ones, but
great.
I could talk all day.
That's great. That's really helpful. Those are three really helpful things, especially the agriculture, because I would have said that the agriculture here wasn't that labor intensive. But and the agriculture, the good thing about it, I think agriculture is a place where there might be one of the first things that does get fixed. And there is quite a lot of ferment around it in DC now. And again, Senator Grassley, I hate to sound like a broken record, but he'll be key in potentially blocking it. And so those guys need to get organized. If they're not, we need to talk about it. That's what I do. I organize people to get in the process. So.
I actually want to touch base on a point that you mentioned, and I hate for that to go unnoticed. I think that the United States is one of the best places to come to because it gives you the opportunity. And I don't know if there's a price tag that you can put on that. One very important aspect of the current regulations that I am going through is equality. So one of the things that the current regulations focus on is that I, as a legal worker, I am being treated as equal as to the next door American. So my rights are preserved as much as anyone else's rights, and I would hate for that to go away. So in the midst of all these reforms and calls for making the process easier and faster and more streamlined, these are the things that I would hate to go away, because these things are the things that don't make me feel like I'm a second-class human being. I know I'm not a citizen yet, but I'm being treated as a first-class human being in this country, which makes this experience hugely valuable.
Very good.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, my name is Jill Stuker, and I'm the director of our Refugee Community Services program at Lutheran Services in Iowa. And just really wanted to highlight the refugee community, individuals who come to the United States with refugee status, also have a considerable amount of hoops to jump through in terms of immigration. Of course, refugees come to the United States with a pathway to citizenship, but they still have to adjust their status to become green card holders and to become citizens. And we have a program for elderly refugees. And their situation is particularly difficult because if they don't become citizens within 7 years of arrival, they lose their benefits under the SSI administration. And we're working with large numbers of Burmese and Bhutanese refugees right now, folks who have literally lived in refugee camps for 30 years, adults who have never in their entire lives been taught how to write their names because they've just been sitting in refugee camps. So now we have to teach them how to pass the civics test in order to retain their benefits. It's really, really frustrating and really, I think, sad that we invite them into our country without them having the understanding that that's a requirement of them. So just wanted to lift that up as well.
Wow.
Thank you.
I didn't even know that. That's fascinating.
Anyone else? Mary?
Thank you, Mary Bontrager with the Greater Des Moines Partnership. Actually, I'm going to share a couple of comments from Vermeer Corporation. They were unable to be here today, but wanted to get a couple of their thoughts out on the table as well. Of course, they have the challenge of the ability to attract and retain the foreign-born students, particularly in the STEM disciplines, the lack of the number of H-1B visas, but a new issue that they ran into last year was with the L visas. And as I say, they're an organization that they are growing internationally, and they need cross-border migration of talent to support their U.S. business. They said the process was long, drawn out. They went through several RFEs and the appeal processes, and still have a challenge with the L visas. So any comments on that?
Yeah.
Excuse me, if you want to explain the L visa.
Sure. So L visa is for, if you already have, it's for intra-company transfers. So if you're a big international company and you have some people working for you in Belgium and you want to bring them here for a while, and it used to be a great, you know, the problem is as you could get with the alphabet soup, you know, it starts at A and it goes all the way down to like V or something. There's a million different kinds, but the trouble is, you know, it's like almost like a blood system where this artery kind of shuts down and that artery shuts down and that artery shuts down, then you use the ones that are open. So L has been a pretty good program in years past, but the Obama administration has, I don't know, basically decided they don't like it, and they've started to put up all kinds of bureaucratic obstacles. And so I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but an RFE is like when the government basically, you know, decides that they're not sure you're using it right and that they don't trust your evidence about who you're out saying that you need, and they investigate you and they delay your getting that person. And the RFPs have gone up, and again, I'm not going to get the number right, but, you know, like in the hundreds of %. You know, they almost didn't used to do any, and now like half of the people who use the visa get an RFP. And so that's a typical complaint. And it sort of shows, I mean, I think what it shows other people is it shows sort of how complicated the system is, but also how it's not just at the mercy of Congress, it's at the mercy of the bureaucrats. And, you know, there can be, and the immigration lawyers are all nodding, you know, it's like, so even, you know, there might, in a lot of kind of walks of life and niches of the economy, there isn't a good visa, like if you're a non-seasonal farmer. But even in places where there is a good visa, like when the Department of Labor decides they don't like it or whatever, they can kind of make it really hard to use. And it's just, you know, the system needs to be, I mean, really, in the ideal world, you take the whole system and you'd scrap it and you'd start over. That's not that practical, you know, we're not going to get to do that. So, you know, I think it's, but I hear you, L1 needs fixing. And the, you know, the truth is that the task force first report, you know, again, is probably going to not get to the micro level of saying we need the L1 visa program fixed, you know. But you know, maybe we, at least now I hear you, maybe we at least get the word in there, intercompany transfer. You know, because again, I think, you know, we're trying to get 500 supporters, explaining L1 to 500 supporters is asking a lot. But I definitely hear you and appreciate the comment.
From a business perspective of an international company transferring people around the globe, the L is,
Huge.
it does stop our business.
Yeah.
The L used to allow after 6 months of employment, so say I hire an employee in the Netherlands, and after 6 months I want to transfer him here for a year. And so if they're a manager in the Netherlands, so Vermeer runs into this, I run into it, I want to transfer them here, I cannot transfer them until they have 2 years of employment outside of the U.S. with my other company. So think about any of you that run a business that you're going to make an employee wait 2 years to develop and grow your business. And the whole intent of the L is we're trying to develop talent. And so the L is typically to allow somebody to have international experience, bring them here for a year or two, their families, their individuals are going to school, they're spending money, they're paying taxes, all of those kinds of things. Actually, I'm paying more money as an employer because I'm paying for Deloitte to do tax equalization and all these other things. So we're spending a lot of extra money here in the U.S. to allow for the business transaction. But with I think the law of Lori, 2 years ago changed about. So that requirement of 2 years of employment outside of the U.S. before I can transfer really stops businesses. It just is a hurdle. So instead, what businesses do, and I've talked to many of my colleagues, they're bringing them on a B1, they'll come in for 90 days, they go back home, and so we're spending a lot on airline traffic, but we're not getting the experience that we want for the family and the individual so that they acclimate and understand our culture.
It's so silly. I mean, it's like, why is the government, like, what's the rationale for making that harder? It's just like,
I
it
understand what they're
defies
trying to do
belief.
is stop businesses, maybe because they couldn't get a H-1B. I'm sure there was an intent there, but it's stopping businesses from doing the right things to grow their business.
I think part of it could have been a knee-jerk reaction, trying to prevent fraud on one side and hobbling something else entirely. So as Clifton wrote in The Coming Jobs War, we can either allow the importing of talent, or we can export the jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have much of a choice other than those two items.
Exactly.
And Lori, do you know what's your perspective on why that change was made?
Yeah, I think it is a lot because they thought that people were using it instead of H-1B.
Yeah.
Basically, they thought it, and there's sort of two camps. I mean, it's how Lori should explain too, but it's like, they're just people who don't think we really need any foreign workers and mistrust anyone who says they want foreign workers, and then,
Actually, someone from American Immigration Lawyers did a study of the L denials over the last several years, and the only thing that that it tracked very closely was actually the unemployment rate. Overall unemployment rate. So it sounds like a little social, a little engineering going on there, just saying, well, if we have out of work U.S. workers, we're not going to let in more foreign workers, no matter how much of a disconnect that is, because these are people that are already working for an affiliated company and have a particular role to play, but that's not quite how it was viewed. So
some viewed it as they were taking available jobs.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to me, and I don't know, I'd be curious your impression from your meetings. I mean, you sort of stated as a fact that immigration is not anti-competitive, and I believe that, but a lot of people hold the other view. So I guess I'd be curious to see what you have to say about that, how you respond to those arguments.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the main argument of the opponents, right? Well, I mean, there are lots of different arguments, but the sort of the argument that's, there's the sort of, we just don't like, we're scared of foreign people, we're scared they're going to change our culture. We don't like the ones who came unauthorized, but there's the big resistance is people who think that they're stealing jobs from Americans. And it's just, no study shows that they are. And, of course you want to structure a program so that people have to try to hire Americans first. I mean, nobody thinks you should skip that. But the resistance is people who don't understand, who think an unemployed person is an unemployed person, a job opening is a job opening, don't understand that, you can't always put that unemployed person in that job opening.
I don't want to hog the microphone, but I did want to ask you one thing. Where are you going with this? Because I know in Iowa we've done a lot of work. The Iowa Immigration Education Coalition that Julie serves on and I serve on has done a lot of work with employers and others trying to get this issue raised, similar coalition to what you're talking about, to get this raised up and to talk to Senator Grassley, talk to some of the others that are really key in this issue. And it's really hard work. So I'm curious what you plan to do to try to help us make a home run on this issue, because it's my experience, people have a lot of trouble standing up on this issue, even though it affects them deeply in their business. It's very difficult to make it a priority issue.
Yeah, so there are two answers. I mean, one is we obviously would love people, I mean, I'm kind of here, I'm wearing two hats, right? One is my immigration task force hat, and the other is my day job hat, which is what I do is I have a national organization that helps employers make the case. So starting with the task force, I mean, we are looking for people to sign up and be one of the 500. And so companies or individuals, anybody who wants to get involved, please do get involved. But what my organization does is help coalitions that try to make this case in the states, and we'd love to work with you in an ongoing, after the task force is done. It's not a choice. Please do sign the task force. But we'd love to work with you. We have coalitions in 25 states, but we don't have one in Iowa, and Iowa's a state where we really need one for sort of obvious reasons. So anybody who is interested, please let's talk about it afterwards. And what we try to do is make it easy for folks, give them the safety of other an organization that, so it's not just a company going with its company hat, try to make it so that, we've done a lot of work helping other employers do it so they're not starting from scratch. We provide resources and sort of the safety of numbers and the safety of a national umbrella. So, love to talk to you.
Rika.
I'm just curious as to whether, sorry, thanks, Juliana. I was just Reka Basu with the Des Moines Register, and I'm just curious as to whether Senator Grassley has ever been invited to sit on a task force like this?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure, people talk to him all the time. I don't know that he was invited I don't know the answer.
Yeah, the task force is not made up of any current elected officials.
Right.
At this time. So our thought was to have leaders from former Mayor Daley to the Republican former governor of South Dakota, and come together in a bipartisan way to lead the discussion, lead the conversation, and then go to them with some recommendations, and at that point get the legislative leaders involved. So kind of grassroots up, and hopefully generate enough support throughout the Midwest to have some consensus, and a bipartisan consensus on 5 or 10 or 20 recommendations. But I think we should frankly set aside what any elected official has ever said or done on immigration. It doesn't do us any good to go back and be critical of a bill in the past. I think we're going forward. We're going to hit the reset button here. We need Senator Grassley. We need Senator Harkin. The reality is this will not get done without bipartisan support at the highest level. And so I think it's more productive to finish our work, put together a solid report with bipartisan recommendations, and work with Congress and perhaps state leaders simultaneously on fixing this broken system. And I think we have some momentum, and I think this approach that the Chicago Council has come up with is a little different than what they've done in the past. And so I'm hopeful that we'll maybe have a breakthrough, but we certainly can't do that without our experts and all of you here in the audience. So I think it's a good time to kind of wrap things up. We want to keep everyone on schedule. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank Tamar. And most importantly, again, Jay Byers has joined us. So he's the CEO of the Des Moines Partnership. Thank you very much, Jay, and Mary, for all of your hard work as well. And I think we'll adjourn the meeting, but we promise to stay in touch with all of you, and hope that you'll stay involved until we can have some success at fixing this immigration system in the future. Thank you very much.